On March 3, 2019, the Henderson family loaded their SUV for what should have been a perfect weekend getaway to the Oregon coast. By 6 p.m. that same day, their vehicle was found running in an empty parking lot, doors unlocked, windows down in the freezing rain. Inside, everything remained exactly as you'd expect for a family trip, except the family had vanished without a trace. But what investigators discovered 5 years later would prove that sometimes the most impossible disappearances hide the most calculated crimes. If you've followed cases like this before, you know that the first few hours are crucial, so make sure you're subscribed because the evidence we'll uncover gets more disturbing with each revelation. Lisa Henderson had spent 3 weeks planning their weekend trip to Lincoln City, methodically researching restaurants and booking an ocean view hotel room that would give 12-year-old twins Emma and Jake their first real glimpse of the Pacific Ocean. At 38, Lisa possessed the organizational skills that came from managing the Clearwater Community Bank's loan department, where precision and attention to detail meant the difference between approving the right mortgage and creating financial disasters that could destroy families. Mark Henderson, 41 and a supervisor at the lumber mill that employed half of Clearwater's working population, had initially resisted the idea of a weekend away during the busy spring season, when orders from Portland construction companies demanded every available hour. But Lisa's argument that their children needed memories beyond homework and video games had eventually won him over, especially when she'd shown him the hotel's brochure featuring a heated indoor pool that would keep the twins entertained even if March weather turned stormy. The Henderson family's departure from their modest 2-story colonial on Pine Street was witnessed by 3 neighbors, each of whom would later provide investigators with details that seemed insignificant until they became crucial pieces of an impossible puzzle. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, who lived directly across the street and maintained a garden that required constant attention to detail, noticed that Mark was loading suitcases into their dark blue Ford Explorer at exactly 11:47 a.m., a timing she remembered precisely because she'd been waiting for the mail carrier who always arrived before noon. Emma and Jake Henderson emerged from the house at 11:52, both carrying backpacks that bulged with what Mrs. Chen assumed were books and electronic devices for entertainment during the 3-hour drive to the coast. Emma, who had inherited her mother's methodical nature, was clutching a folder that Mrs. Chen would later learn contained printed directions to every stop they'd planned along their route, despite the vehicle's GPS system that Mark had updated the previous evening. Jake, more impulsive than his twin sister, was already climbing into the back seat when Lisa Henderson appeared in the doorway, conducting what appeared to be a final security check of their home. She tested the front door lock twice, peered through the living room window to ensure she'd closed all the curtains, and activated the alarm system that would protect their house during their brief absence. At 11:58 a.m., the Henderson family backed out of their driveway and turned east on Pine Street toward Highway 126, the most direct route to the Oregon coast. Mrs. Chen waved from her garden, receiving enthusiastic responses from both children who were clearly excited about their adventure. Lisa rolled down her passenger window and called out that they'd be back Sunday evening, a detail that would later become important when investigators tried to establish their intended timeline. The last confirmed sighting of the Henderson family occurred at 12:31 p.m. at Benson's gas station, approximately 18 miles outside Clearwater, where security cameras captured Mark filling the Explorer's tank while Lisa and the children used the restroom facilities. The timestamp on the footage showed that their stop lasted exactly 7 minutes, during which nothing appeared unusual about the family's behavior or interactions with other customers. Store clerk Tommy Valdez, a 19-year-old college student who worked weekend shifts to pay for his education, served Lisa when she purchased bottled water and snacks for the road trip. Tommy would later tell investigators that Lisa had seemed excited about their vacation, mentioning that this was the children's first visit to the ocean and that they'd planned to collect shells and build sandcastles despite the cool March weather. The surveillance footage from Benson's gas station revealed details that investigators would scrutinize for years afterward. Mark appeared relaxed and smiled when another customer commented on the Explorer's Oregon State University decal, engaging in the kind of casual conversation that suggested a man without concerns about his family's safety. The twins were visible through the station's windows, examining the candy selection with the careful deliberation of children who'd been given specific spending limits and wanted to maximize their choices. At 12:38 p.m., the Henderson family departed Benson's gas station for what should have been a routine drive through the Cascade foothills toward the Pacific coast. The route they'd chosen was heavily traveled, passing through small communities where weekend tourist traffic was common and where a family in a dark blue SUV would have been entirely unremarkable among dozens of similar vehicles making the same journey. The discovery of their abandoned Ford Explorer 5.5 hours later would transform this ordinary family vacation into Oregon's most baffling missing persons case and expose secrets that had been carefully hidden in Clearwater for decades. Detective Rachel Morrison received the call about the abandoned vehicle at 6:47 p.m., just as she was preparing to end her shift at the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department and drive home to a dinner that would grow cold while she processed a crime scene that defied logical explanation. The Explorer had been found in the parking lot of Drift Creek Wilderness Trailhead, approximately 43 miles from Benson's gas station and 26 miles from their intended destination in Lincoln City. The vehicle was running when hikers discovered it, headlights cutting through the gathering darkness while windshield wipers battled the steady rain that had been falling since mid-afternoon. Both front windows were rolled completely down, allowing the March cold and moisture to soak the interior seats and carpeting, a detail that immediately struck Morrison as inconsistent with normal human behavior during inclement weather. The Explorer's doors were unlocked, though the keys remained in the ignition, with the engine still running after what investigators would later determine had been approximately 5 hours of continuous operation. The fuel gauge showed less than a quarter tank remaining, indicating that the vehicle would have run out of gas within another hour if the hikers hadn't discovered it when they did. Inside the SUV, investigators found a scene that was simultaneously normal and deeply disturbing in its implications. The Henderson family's luggage remained neatly arranged in the cargo area, suitcases unopened and positioned exactly as Mark had loaded them that morning under Mrs. Chen's observation. Lisa's purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet intact with credit cards and $187 in cash, while her cell phone was plugged into the vehicle's charging port with a battery level of 86%. The children's backpacks were still in the rear seat containing homework assignments that would never be completed, electronic devices that showed no unusual activity, and Emma's carefully organized folder of trip plans that investigators would study for clues about the family's intended movements. Jake's handheld gaming device had been paused mid-level in a racing game, suggesting that their disappearance had occurred suddenly without time for normal shutdown procedures. Crime scene technicians documented every detail of the abandoned Explorer with forensic photography that would be analyzed countless times during the investigation that followed. The vehicle's interior showed no signs of struggle, no blood evidence, and no indications that violence had occurred within the confines of the SUV. The steering wheel, gear shift, and door handles retained clear fingerprints belonging to Mark and Lisa Henderson, with no unknown prints that might indicate the presence of an abductor or carjacker. The most puzzling evidence emerged from the vehicle's electronic systems, which investigators accessed through the Explorer's onboard computer that tracked location, speed, and operational data. The GPS navigation system showed that the Hendersons had been following their planned route toward Lincoln City until 1:47 p.m., when their vehicle had deviated from Highway 126 and taken a series of back roads that eventually led to the wilderness area where they were found. The route deviation lasted 43 minutes and covered 26 miles of rural roads that weren't marked on standard tourist maps, suggesting either that the family had deliberately chosen an alternate route or that someone else had been controlling their vehicle's direction during that crucial time period. The GPS data showed multiple stops of 2 to 3 minutes each, though investigators couldn't determine whether these represented traffic lights, stop signs, or something more sinister. Detective Morrison's preliminary investigation revealed that the Drift Creek Wilderness Trailhead was not a random location, but a carefully chosen spot that offered specific advantages to someone who wanted to make a family disappear without witnesses. The parking area was isolated from main traffic routes, surrounded by dense forest that could conceal activities from passing vehicles, and equipped with trails that led deep into mountainous terrain, where search efforts would be complicated by weather and difficult access. The initial search for the Henderson family began at dawn on March 4th, involving 60 volunteers from Clearwater and surrounding communities who formed search lines that methodically combed through miles of forest trails and logging roads. The Oregon State Police provided helicopter support that was grounded repeatedly due to fog and low cloud cover, while search and rescue dogs tracked scents that seemed to vanish at the parking lot's edge, as if the family had simply evaporated. By the third day of searching, investigators had covered a 15-mile radius around the abandoned Explorer without finding any trace of the Henderson family or evidence that might explain their disappearance. The lack of physical evidence, combined with weather conditions that destroyed potential tracks or scent trails, created a frustrating situation where traditional search methods proved ineffective against what appeared to be an impossibly clean crime scene. The investigation expanded beyond physical searching to include financial records, communication analysis, and background checks that might reveal whether the Henderson family had enemies or connections to criminal activity. Detective Morrison discovered that Mark and Lisa's marriage was stable, their finances were sound, and neither parent had any history of legal troubles or associations with individuals who might pose threats to their family's safety. The children's social media accounts and school records showed normal activities and friendships without any indications of bullying, online predators, or other dangers that might have motivated someone to target the family. Emma and Jake were popular students who participated in school activities and maintained grades that suggested well-adjusted children from a loving home environment. As the days turned into weeks without any credible leads or sightings, the Henderson family's disappearance began consuming resources and manpower that the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department couldn't sustain indefinitely. The search area was gradually reduced, volunteer participation declined, and the case slowly transitioned from active investigation to cold case status, despite the desperate pleas of extended family members who couldn't accept that 4 people had simply vanished without explanation. Lisa Henderson's sister, Sarah Martinez, drove from Sacramento to Oregon every weekend for 6 months, posting flyers in every business that would accept them and conducting her own interviews with residents who might have seen something suspicious on March 3, 2019. Sarah's amateur investigation uncovered no new evidence, but her persistence kept the Henderson case in local media coverage that gradually attracted attention from true crime enthusiasts and amateur investigators who proposed theories ranging from alien abduction to witness protection program relocation. The psychological toll on Clearwater's residents became apparent during the months following the disappearance, as parents struggled with fears that their own families might be targeted by whatever force had taken the Hendersons. Elementary school enrollment dropped as families moved away from the area. Local business suffered from decreased tourism, and the community's sense of security was permanently damaged by the realization that safety was an illusion that could be shattered without warning or explanation. Mark's employer, Clearwater Lumber Mill, established a memorial fund for the Henderson family while maintaining his position open for 1 year in case he returned to explain their absence. The fund grew to over $40,000 through contributions from mill workers, local businesses, and strangers who had been moved by the story of a family that had disappeared during what should have been a happy weekend vacation. Detective Morrison continued working the case as time and resources permitted, following up on tips that arrived sporadically from across the Pacific Northwest. Most leads proved to be cases of mistaken identity or well-meaning individuals who had seen families that resembled the Hendersons, but were actually other tourists or residents going about their normal activities. The first anniversary of their disappearance brought renewed media attention and a thorough review of all evidence by fresh investigators who hoped to find overlooked clues or connections that might break the case open. The review confirmed that the original investigation had been thorough and competent, but hadn't uncovered any evidence that could explain how 4 people had vanished so completely from a location that offered limited escape routes and no obvious places to hide bodies or evidence. By 2021, the Henderson family's disappearance had become one of Oregon's most famous unsolved cases, featured in true crime podcasts and television programs that brought national attention to their story while failing to generate any useful leads or theories that investigators hadn't already considered and eliminated. The case file grew thick with tips, theories, and false sightings that consumed investigative hours without advancing the search for answers. The breakthrough that would finally solve the Henderson family's disappearance came from an unexpected source and in a manner that no one involved in the original investigation could have predicted, proving once again that sometimes the most complex mysteries are solved through pure coincidence rather than brilliant detective work. Construction worker Miguel Santos was renovating the basement of a foreclosed house on Elm Street in Clearwater when his sledgehammer broke through what he assumed was an ordinary wall, but discovered instead a hidden room that had been concealed behind false paneling for an unknown period of time. The house, which had been purchased by a Portland developer for renovation and resale, had sat empty for 18 months following the death of its elderly owner, Harold Wickham, who had lived there alone since 1987. The hidden room measured approximately 8 feet by 12 feet and contained items that immediately prompted Miguel to call the police rather than continuing his renovation work. The space held children's clothing in sizes consistent with 12-year-old children, adult clothing that appeared to have been worn and discarded, and personal items including a woman's wedding ring and a man's wallet that contained identification belonging to Mark Henderson. Detective Morrison, now promoted to lead investigator for the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department, arrived at the Elm Street house within 30 minutes of Miguel's call, accompanied by crime scene technicians who began the careful process of documenting and collecting evidence from what appeared to be the first concrete lead in the Henderson case since their vehicle had been discovered 5 years earlier. The forensic examination of Harold Wickham's basement revealed DNA evidence that conclusively linked the Henderson family to the hidden room, though the condition of the evidence and the passage of time made it impossible to determine exactly when they had been held there or for how long their captivity had lasted. The discovery of Harold's detailed journals, hidden in a separate compartment within the secret room, would provide the answers that investigators and the Henderson family's relatives had been seeking for 5 agonizing years. Harold Wickham's journals, written in meticulous handwriting that filled 23 spiral notebooks, documented a fantasy life that had centered on the abduction and control of perfect families who represented everything he believed he had been denied during his 78 years of bitter isolation. The entries revealed that Harold had spent decades studying families in Clearwater, learning their routines and vulnerabilities while planning elaborate scenarios in which he would integrate himself into their lives through force rather than the social connections he had never been able to develop naturally. The journal entries specific to the Henderson family began appearing in January 2019, 2 months before their disappearance, with Harold documenting Lisa's banking schedule, Mark's work shifts, and the children's school activities with the obsessive detail of a predator who understood that successful hunting required extensive preparation. He had identified the family's planned vacation through careful observation of their preparations and had positioned himself along their travel route with timing that demonstrated months of planning rather than opportunistic crime. Harold's account of March 3, 2019, revealed that he had used a fake medical emergency to flag down the Henderson family's explorer on a remote stretch of their alternate route, counting on their small-town instincts to help a stranger in apparent distress. Once Mark had stopped to assist, Harold had used a concealed weapon to force the family into compliance, then had driven their vehicle to the wilderness parking lot while following in his own car to create the abandoned vehicle scene that had mystified investigators. The transportation of 4 unwilling captives from the wilderness area to Harold's basement had been accomplished through methods that his journals described in disturbing detail, involving sedation and the use of a panel van that he had purchased specifically for this purpose and had concealed in a rented storage unit outside Clearwater. Harold's careful planning had anticipated every aspect of the abduction, from the timing needed to move unconscious victims without detection to the supplies required to maintain their captivity for an extended period. The journals revealed that Harold's ultimate fantasy had been to convince the Henderson family that he was their protector rather than their captor, believing that Stockholm Syndrome would eventually create the loving family relationships he had never experienced through legitimate means. The psychological manipulation he employed was sophisticated and cruel, alternating between kindness and threats while maintaining complete control over their environment and access to basic necessities. The discovery of Harold's basement revealed evidence of the family's captivity that painted a horrific picture of their final months, though investigators were careful not to release details details that might traumatize the community or compromise the ongoing investigation into Harold's background and potential accomplices. The forensic evidence confirmed that all 4 family members had been held in the hidden room for a significant period, though determining exact timelines proved impossible due to the degraded condition of biological evidence. Harold Wickham's death in November 2023, approximately 18 months before the discovery of his basement prison, had been attributed to natural causes by the attending physician, who had been called to his home by concerned neighbors who hadn't seen him for several days. The timing of his death, combined with evidence found in his journals, suggested that the Henderson family's ordeal had lasted approximately 4.5 years, ending only when their captor's failing health had eliminated their sole source of food and care. The investigation into Harold's background revealed a disturbing pattern of social isolation and resentment that had developed over decades of perceived rejection and failure to form normal relationships. His employment history showed frequent job changes due to conflicts with supervisors and co-workers, while his personal relationships had been limited to superficial interactions with neighbors who described him as odd but harmless, a characterization that proved tragically inaccurate. Harold's financial records revealed that he'd been receiving disability payments since 1995 following a workplace injury that had left him with chronic pain and limited mobility, conditions that hadn't prevented him from planning and executing the Henderson family's abduction, but had contributed to the social isolation that had festered into violent fantasy and eventually criminal action. His modest income had been supplemented by careful savings and investments that had allowed him to purchase the specialized equipment needed for his basement prison and the panel van used in the abduction. The discovery of additional journals dating back to 1987 revealed that Harold had been contemplating similar crimes for over 3 decades, with detailed plans for abducting other families that had been discarded due to logistical challenges or missed opportunities. Several entries referenced families that had moved away from Clearwater or had changed their routines in ways that had disrupted Harold's surveillance and planning, possibly saving their lives through pure coincidence. Detective Morrison's investigation into Harold's activities during the years of the Henderson family's captivity revealed that he had maintained normal interactions with neighbors and service providers while concealing 4 people in his basement, demonstrating a level of compartmentalization and deception that had enabled him to avoid suspicion despite the intensive investigation occurring throughout Clearwater during the months following their disappearance. The psychological evaluation of Harold's journals and personal effects was conducted by Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic psychologist who specialized in cases involving long-term captivity and psychological manipulation. Dr. Foster's report documented evidence of severe personality disorders and delusional thinking that had created a fantasy world in which Harold believed his actions were justified and even beneficial to his victims, whom he convinced himself were better off under his protection than in their previous lives. The revelation that Harold Wickham had been living among them while holding the Henderson family prisoner created a secondary trauma for Clearwater residents who realized they had interacted with him normally during the years of his crime. Neighbors recalled casual conversations over garden fences, delivery drivers described routine interactions, and service technicians remembered visiting his home without detecting any evidence of the horror occurring in his basement. The discovery solved the Henderson family's disappearance, but created new questions about how such elaborate crimes could occur without detection. In small communities where residents believed they knew everyone and looked out for each other's safety, the case prompted reviews of missing persons, procedures, and community awareness programs designed to help residents identify signs of predatory behavior before it escalated to violence. The location of the Henderson family's remains became the investigation's final priority, with search teams focusing on Harold's property and areas he was known to frequent during his decades of residence in Clearwater. The search was complicated by Harold's journals, which contained cryptic references to permanent rest and joining the earth without specific location details that might guide recovery efforts. The closure that the Henderson family's relatives had sought for 5 years proved to be more devastating than the uncertainty they had endured, as the details of their loved one's captivity and death created new categories of grief and trauma that would require years of professional counseling to process. The knowledge that Mark, Lisa, Emma and Jake had suffered for years, while their family searched desperately for answers, added layers of guilt and regret to already overwhelming loss. The Harold Wickham case transformed how law enforcement agencies across Oregon approached missing persons investigations, with new protocols for examining seemingly impossible disappearances and expanded background checks for residents near crime scenes who might have the means and opportunity to commit elaborate crimes. The case also highlighted the importance of community vigilance and the potential dangers posed by isolated individuals whose social disconnection might mask violent tendencies. The renovation of Harold's house was permanently suspended, with the structure eventually being demolished due to community pressure and the developer's inability to find buyers willing to live in a location associated with such horrific crimes. The lot remains empty, serving as an informal memorial to the Henderson family and a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades in even the safest-seeming communities. For those who followed this case from the beginning, the Henderson family story serves as a devastating reminder that sometimes the most impossible disappearances are the result of the most calculated predators, and that justice, when it finally comes, often brings more pain than peace. The case changed Clearwater forever, leaving residents with the knowledge that their neighbor's basement had concealed one of Oregon's most horrific crimes while they went about their daily lives just feet away from unimaginable suffering. The memorial service for Mark, Lisa, Emma, and Jake Henderson was held on a gray October morning in 2024, 5 years and 7 months after they had loaded their SUV for what should have been a perfect family vacation to the Oregon coast. The service drew hundreds of attendees from across the Pacific Northwest, including people who had never met the family but had followed their story through years of searching and hoping for their safe return. Detective Morrison, now preparing for retirement after a 30-year career in law enforcement, delivered a eulogy that acknowledged both the resolution of the case and the devastating cost of that resolution for everyone who had loved the Henderson family. The investigation had consumed her career and changed her understanding of human nature, leaving her with the knowledge that evil could hide behind the most mundane exteriors, and that even the most thorough investigations might fail to protect the innocent from predators who planned their crimes with sufficient patience and cunning. The Henderson case file, now officially closed, occupies 4 file cabinets in the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department's evidence room, containing thousands of pages of reports, interviews, and analysis that document both the crime and the community's response to it. The file serves as a training resource for new investigators and a sobering reminder of the complexity and psychological toll of cases involving missing families and long-term captivity. If you've been following this investigation, consider subscribing to stay informed about other cases that demand justice and accountability. Share your thoughts about how communities can better identify and address the warning signs of predatory behavior before it escalates to the kind of calculated violence that destroyed the Henderson family and forever changed everyone who knew them.